Colloquium. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you Hui Zheng. Hui is professor in the Department of Sociology at Ohio State University. He received his PhD in sociology from Duke University in 2011, and we actually overlapped there for a few years. It was a pleasure to get to know him. His area of specialization is population health, with a focus on the connection between social structure and institutions and how they translate into health inequalities, and also changes in the population processes that are connected to health, aging, and mortality. He has published extensively in the major journals in the field, including Demography, American Sociological Review, Social Science and Medicine, American Journal of Epidemiology, Journal of Marriage and Family, just to name a few. Hugh's work on trends in health disparities and life expectancy is particularly important today, given the dramatic reversal in mortality decline that we're seeing, and so we're very much looking forward to his talk. Okay, so please help me welcome Hugh.
All right, thank you, Emilio, for a very kind introduction. It's such a pleasure and honor to present here. Penn, in my mind, is one of the best park centers in this country. So today I'm going to present one ongoing work with my current and past grad students, Yung-Yan Choi, Jonathan Paula, and Professor Linda George, who is also my mentor from Duke University. And I'm going to present like 3 papers regarding to U.S. health trend, which is a very complicated phenomenon. That's why I'm trying to kind of look at different aspects of this health trend. And I'm going to talk about smoking, death disparities, and my recent work about the declining health across both cohorts from baby boomers to millennials. So U.S. standing in international ranking of life expectancy have been declining over time from the middle of the ranking in the late 1980s to the bottom of the rankings in the 2000s. And this has happened for both men and women.
So this is OECD countries?
Yeah, OECD countries. Yeah, like they compare like
I didn't
to
see
like
India.
yeah to like selecting no, not India here.
Yeah. Which is part of the international system.
Yeah. So right. So this is many comparison between U.S. and the other OECD countries. And since 2010, not only the relative ranking of the life expectancy has been declining over time, but also the absolute level of life expectancy has been stagnating or even declining between 2015 and 2018. And again, this kind of stagnating and declining life expectancy happened for both men and both women and men, and also for the 4 major racial groups. And accompanied with this declining or stagnating life expectancy is this widening gap by education in life expectancy. That's why we observe a more kind of steeper declines in life expectancy for those without bachelor degree. And for those with a bachelor degree, even though life expectancy is still increasing, but it kind of increases at a slower rate over time. So against this backdrop, I'm going to present 3 papers. The first paper is about education of smoking disparities and how this may change across both cohorts. Especially, I'm going to pay attention to the mechanisms that may shape the differential education gap in smoking disparities, a smoking preference across both cohorts by race. And the second paper is more directly talking to the death disparity narrative proposed by Case Deaton, since they're kind of very influential paper in 2015 published in PNAS. The third paper is about declining health in baby boomers to millennials. So the first paper about this education, smoking disparities. So smoking is one of the major risk factors contributing to morbidity, disease, and mortality, right? And also contribute to this widening education gap in mortality and life expectancy over time in the US. And for example, some research by Jessica Ho, who is a very good graduate from this top center, and also Jennifer Montes, they found the smoking can account for about 50% of this widening education gap in mortality among white women, maybe less for other racial groups. But overall, smoking makes a very important contribution to this widening education disparity in mortality. But it's not very clear where this differential smoking trend happened before this widening education gap in mortality. all this smoking is one of the mediating mechanisms contributing to this widening education gap in mortality. So in order to answer this question, it's very important for us to quantify the timing of a smoking initiation and the timing of smoking cessation and how they jointly contribute to this widening education gap in smoking preference across cohort. So this is our kind of conceptual diagram, which is very straightforward. That is, smoking preference is jointly shaped by smoking initiation and the smoking cessation. Then education gap in smoking preference is influenced by education gap in smoking initiation and the smoking cessation. Then the changing education gap in smoking preference across cohort is caused by the changing relationship between education and smoking initiation and smoking cessation. So in a word, we want to figure out how this education gap in smoking initiation and smoking cessation across both cohort may contribute to the changing education gap in smoking preference. But we want to further figure out how race may potentially pattern this kind of cohort trend in smoking disparities. Yeah, feel free to kind of ask any clarifying questions if you have any. So data we use is from National Health Interval Survey data from 1997 to 2018. And this table shows the level and also the education gap in smoking preference across 9 cohorts by 3 racial groups among women. The reason why we focus on women, not men, because research like Mantis and also Jessica Hall's paper find smoking does not contribute much to the widening gap in mortality among men, but mainly it contributes to the widening gap in mortality among women. That's why in this study we focus on women. And as you can see that the education gap in smoking preference increased dramatically among white women from like 1% difference in the greater generation to 25% difference in the generation Y. In other words, it means that the widening education gap in smoking preference increased by about 24 percentage points among white women. And this increase is more modest among black women, which is called...
Excuse me, is that at a particular age? Or
yes, yeah, we control for age.
No, I mean, the difference, you measure it at a particular age.
So we adjust for age, right? So it's not within each age group, but adjust for age.
You say that somebody in a certain generation smokes, what do you mean?
Can I second? Yeah.
You say that the difference between the smoking of 2 generations, what does that mean? It means that the fraction of those age 50 smoke, the fraction that have ever smoked, what is the exact variable?
So
that you have in mind?
smoking preference is a difference in the current smoking status, right? So in the data, NHS data is kind of poor consortium data, right? So ask them where you're currently smoking.
Or currently smoking.
Yeah, exactly. So later on, yeah, so let's go back to the concept diagram here, right? So smoking preference refers to the difference of the current smoking status, right? So it's influenced by the initiation smoking and also influenced by the smoking cessation. Right? So you look at the education gap in the current smoking status, how this may be influenced by these 2 mechanisms. Okay, so this increase in education gap in smoking preference is more modest for black women, which is about like 13 percentage point increase across these 9 generations, and much more modest among Hispanic women, about 2 percentage point increase. Right. So then the question is why these 3 racial groups have so different trend in this education gap in smoking preference across these 9 cohorts. So we want to kind of quantify or disentangle contribution of initiation or cessation to figure out where initiation contribute to this very different cohort trend in education gap in smoking preference, also cessation play a role. So since the NHS data provides the information about the age of onset smoking, but also age of quitting smoking, so we are able to construct the smoking history and then use survival analysis to account for this kind of right censoring problem across both cohorts, and then to see how this hazard smoking initiation may change across both cohorts by race and by education group. Right, so basically we conduct survival analysis by like 6 groups, right, and you can see that white women experience a very different cohort pattern in the hazard of smoking initiation compared to our group. So for white women, the hazard of smoking initiation source from 36% higher compared to greater generation for early childhood depression to about 110% higher for Generation Y compared to greater generation. And this hazard peaks in the late Generation X and then slowly declines afterwards. And in contrast, for Black and Hispanic women without bachelor degree, right, the peaking point comes at early age, early birth cohort, peak in the late baby boomers, and then dramatically or substantially declines afterwards. And this decline is even more dramatic for women with a bachelor degree. Right? So for example, for white women, the hazard peak in the war babies, and then substantial declines afterwards. And for more recent cohort, they actually have lower hazard of smoking initiation compared to greater generation. And this consumer cohort pattern is also observed for Black women with a bachelor degree and Hispanic women with a bachelor degree. Right? So due to this very different trend in smoking initiation by education, that then leads to the widening education gap in smoking initiation across both cohort for white women and for Black women, and less for Hispanic women. So since this, yes,
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you're measuring as current smoking status,
Yeah.
but the smoking initiation is the age when they first started smoking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are two different variables. You ask them, are you smoking now, and when is the age?
Right, right. So we look at this kind of initiation smoking, that is with the outcomes and the hazard. It's a timing from age 6 to the age of smoking initiation. So this is not about the current smoking status.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, answer your question.
So in almost all categories in this table for Hispanic women, to have more education increases the risk of smoking. While in the other
Increase
groups, it's the
until
other
around
way
early
around.
baby boomers.
What?
Increase around early baby boomers, and after early baby boomers, the hazard ratio of smoking initiation actually declines. Right, so for white women, the peaking point is at war babies, and the outer war babies, the hazard ratio compared to this greater generation, which is reference group, declines outwards. And for Black women, the peaking point is late childhood depression, and for Hispanic women is early baby boomers. So after early baby boomers, the hazard of smoking initiation actually declines. Yeah, good. Yeah. So we further want to kind of plot this survival curve for this smoking initiation across both cohort by gender, by race, and also by education degree. Right. So the left panel shows the cohort curve of survival curve of smoking initiation for white women without bachelor degree. So y-axis here is a probability of having not initiated smoking. Right. So this is a survival curve, and the lighter lines is for the early cohort, and the darker lines is for the younger cohort. Right. So if we compare across cohort, we find survival curve can push down. In other words, it means that the younger birth cohort initiate smoking at the early ages, and they also have lower survival probability of having not initiated smoking. Right. So in other words, for white women without bachelor degree, the more recent cohort are more likely to initiate smoking compared to early cohort. And the pattern for white women with a bachelor degree actually flip. Right. So you find that for later birth cohort, they are more likely to initiate smoking at older ages, and they also have higher survival probability of having not initiated smoking. Right? So in other words, they initiate smoking at older ages, and they're also less likely to initiate smoking. Right? So due to this kind of flip cohort pattern by education degree, that then contribute to this widening education gap in smoking initiation across cohort for white women. Right? And one thing I want to emphasize here is that no matter for which education group and for which cohort, the majority of women initiate smoking before age 20. Right? So after age 20, the survival curve actually stabilizes. In other words, not many women initiate smoking after age 20. Right? Most smokers initiate before age 20. And we find similar pattern for Black women with a bachelor degree and without bachelor degree as white women with a bachelor degree. That is, the later birth cohort initiate smoking at older ages, and they also less likely to initiate smoking. Right? Similar for white women with a bachelor degree. But this kind of increasing survival probability of having not initiated smoking is more dramatic for those with a bachelor degree compared to those without bachelor degree. Let's then contribute to this widening education gap in smoking initiation for black women, and a similar pattern also observed for Hispanic women, but this increased survival probability is less dramatic compared to white women or compared to black women. That then leads to a non-significant change in the education gap in smoking initiation across cohort for Hispanic women. Okay. So next we look at the smoking cessation. That is only look at ever smokers, right? So we want to kind of join ever smokers, and then look at the timing of smoking cessation and how this may change across cohort and how this may differ by education and also racial group, right? So, and overall, the reference group here is still is a great generation, but overall you find the later birth cohort are more likely to quit smoking compared to early birth cohort. Right, no matter which education group and which racial group we look at. And we further create interaction between education and the birth cohort to see where this education gap in smoking cessation may change significantly across birth cohort. Right, we find that for example, white women, within each birth cohort, those with a bachelor degree are more likely to quit smoking, but this education gap in smoking cessation actually shrink or weaken across birth cohort. In other words, it means that this kind of diminished educational advantage in smoking cessation does not really contribute to this widening education gap in smoking preference across cohort. Right? So smoking cessation is not a mechanism contributing to this widening education gap in smoking preference. And similarly, for black women, like Hispanic women, within every cohort, those with a bachelor degree are more likely to quit smoking, but this education gap in smoking cessation does not significantly change across both cohorts. Right? We further kind of plot this pattern in survival curve, right? And the lighter line again is older generation, darker lines are the older or younger generation. Right? So for each education group, the recent cohort are more likely to quit smoking, and if you remember the survival curve for the smoking initiation, you'll find smoking cessation has very different pattern. Right? So for both those without bachelor degree and with bachelor degree, the younger cohort are more likely to quit smoking, and there's not much kind of education difference in the cohort pattern. Yes?
How do you measure at what age they quit smoking? Because people try so many times. So you still don't know whether this is the last time
Right.
they decided to quit.
Right, so that's a very good question. So in the HIS data, they do not have this kind of intermittent smoking cessation. They only ask like where you quit smoking and when's age. So we don't know where they maybe can relapse later on. Right, so we don't have that information. Right, so yeah, very good question. Yeah, so and then for black women and the Hispanic women, we also find similar story here. That is the late birth cohort are more likely to quit smoking compared to the early birth cohort. But there's no kind of educational difference in the cohort pattern. Again, even within each cohort, the higher educated are more likely to quit smoking. But this education advantage in quit smoking does not change across cohort. Right? And the similar story also find for Hispanic women. So the summary from the first paper is that this widening education gap in smoking preference across cohort is not really due to this effect of education or college degree of smoking cessation, because for every education group, we find they have similar cohort trend in smoking cessation. Right? Instead, this widening education gap in smoking preference is due to this widening education gap in smoking cessation. Right, especially for white women, because for white women without bachelor degree, they become more likely to quit initial smoking compared to early birth cohort. Right, but one thing I want to emphasize that is because majority of women who initiate smoking before age 20, right, then this widening education gap in smoking initiation does not reflect the effect of college degree on smoking cessation, but reflect the increasing smokers into those without bachelor degree. Right, so this kind of finding has very important implication on the role of selection bias in figuring out in the trend of educational health disparities. So some people work like Lu Henning, who's now kind of famous graduate from this pop center, and among Elo's work, they find selection plays a very important role in the widening education gap in health.
Do you have any table with the average number of years that smokers have smoked?
Can you second?
Do you have any table or any graph showing the average number of years by education that each smoker has smoked?
Right. So so look at this kind of smoking cessation. Then, yeah, we don't have the average number of years they spend on smoking, but yeah, based on this survival curve, we can only see like the average, the percentage population, like 40% quit smoking at around age 40 for the most recent cohort for white women without bachelor degree. So we only have information about this timing of the smoking cessation, but basically I can get that information. It's just not represented in the survival analysis here.
Yeah, also, the amount of smoking, is that a factor? Do you have information about how much people smoke?
Yeah, we don't have that information. We don't have like how many kind of cigarettes smoke every day. Yeah, we don't have that information. Very good. Yes, Wendy.
Do you have information on the educational or class backgrounds of the parents of the individuals? Because it seems like selection into higher education may have a lot to do with class background.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's NHS data, they don't have parental education, but I think the paper we're trying to really to argue that the reason why people initiate smoking is not because of their education degree, it's because the bundle of the early life disadvantage may include like parental education, may include parents' smoking behavior, right? So yeah, so basically the main point is initiation is result from the early life condition. It's not due to a college degree. Right, and and this kind of, so in this paper we only look at smoking, but ongoing paper with my student Yongyan Choi, we also look at drug, right? So we're trying to figure out where this kind of widening education gap in drug behavior is due to college education, or it actually happened before college education. Right, so this kind of is a good segue to the second paper about death disparities. Right, so Case Eaton, they published one very influential paper in PNAS in 2015, and they find that there's a kind of increasing increasing mortality rate among middle-aged, lower-educated white Americans, right? And this is a very different trend compared to Hispanic in the U.S. and also compared to our population in other countries. And they attribute this increasing middle-aged mortality rate among white Americans to cause death due to the drug poisoning and suicide and alcohol consumption, right? And combined with the stagnation in the progress in the heart disease-related mortality rate. And they further argue that the death from drug poisoning and the suicide and alcohol may imply that the victims may suffer from this psychological distress, right? Or we kind of call it as PD here. That's why they use death disparities as a blanket term to categorize these three causes of death. And this narrative is so influential, right? And also it kind of spurs a lot of debate about this where we should call it death disparities and where death disparities really contribute to the rising mortality rate. Right? So some scholars argue that these three causes of death, drug poisoning, suicide, and alcohol, they display very different trend over time by demographic group, also by county. That's why they think these three causes of death do not share the same etiology. And other scholars, they especially look at the drug epidemic, right? And look at like exploit this county variation in drug epidemic, and argue that this drug epidemic is mainly due to the drug environment. That is the availability of illegal and legal drugs, then this economic decline, which is supposed to be a precursor of this kind of psychological distress. And we argue in this paper that all these papers, they look at the cause of death, right? They look at cause of death, even though the conclusions are different across studies, but they mainly look at these three causes of death. And they do not really look at despair itself, right? So, and we argue that that's kind of two major limitations of using focusing on the DAS related to mortality rate. The first is we may potentially misattribute these three causes of death despair, right? So it may, due to our reasons, like drug availability, as our researchers has argued, But the second is more important reason. That is, if we only focus on these three causes of death, we may potentially underestimate the mortality impact of despair. Right? Because despair can also lead to other unhealthy behaviors like smoking, overeating, stress eating. So that can lead to, that may imply that other causes of death like obesity, cancer, heart disease, diabetes may also reflect to some degree is a consequence of the despair. Right? So that's why in this paper we want to directly investigate despair as a determinant of death. Right? And then we try to quantify the despair-related mortality rate and the despair-related number of deaths, and how this relationship may change over time, and how this relationship may vary by ratio. Right. So, and we're further going to kind of compare this PD related of psychological distress related mortality rate to DAS related mortality rate to figure out what's the relationship between these two causes of death. Okay. So for drug, alcohol, suicide related death, the data come from the CDC macro cause of death, and the population parameter come from the CDC Bridge population estimate. And in this study, we use the psychological distress as a proxy for despair, because both of them encompass a sense of hopelessness, and both of them are a reaction to the kind of individual to the stressors in individual life. That's why I think psychological distress and despair may share kind of similar etiology here. And the PD-related death come from data that is National Health Interview Survey data with linked mortality from 1997 to 2014. And the psychological distress is measured by 6 items: felt worthless, sad, hopeless, everything was effort, nervous, restless. Right? So then we kind of combine this as an index and then further categorize into 3 groups: no, minimum, moderate, and severe psychological distress. And then we use survival model to estimate the mortality hazard ratio of this psychological distress, and then we convert it to this PAF, and I think everyone in Penn knows PAF because some person use this. So we kind of convert this mortality hazard ratio to PAF, and then multiply PAF with this with the mortality rate to get the psychological distress related mortality rate. Right. So in order to eliminate the possible age difference across racial group and over time, then we age standardize both the DAS related mortality rate and PD related mortality rate to 2000s US age structure. Okay,
do you also have cause of death in the second data set?
So for the NHS, they have cause of death information before 2004, and after that it becomes restricted data. Right, so that's why we, for this reason, and also because that despair should have much broader mortality consequence rather than just each specific cause of death. That's why we look at the overall mortality consequence of despair. Right, so you kind of, first we do a survival analysis, right, and then we kind of create this PAF, and then generate this mortality rate. I'm going to skip the survival analysis part.
Question slightly different. I don't think you answered it.
Yeah.
What we want to know is that of all the things that a person can be,
Yeah.
just put in everybody in 3 Ds, and you're not and by age. So the only things you are considering are age, to be in the bottom half of education, and the mean of distress. No other variable, nothing else.
We control for.
Yeah. So I'm saying, are you doing any other variables than those 3?
So in terms of outcome, we only look at mortality. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the right-hand side, are there any other variables except age,
Yeah.
education, being, and the 3 Ds of
Yeah. So on the right-hand side, as shown here, right, and we create upper bound and lower bound analysis for this mortality hazard ratio or PD, right? And so both our upper bound, lower bound, we control for education, we control for family income to needs ratio, and we also control for we also control for several other variables, but for upper bound, we does not control for smoking, drinking, and obesity, because these 3 behaviors potentially can be the mechanism linking despair to mortality.
So you're saying this is the measure of despair, of psychological distress, way beyond low income, way beyond unemployment, way beyond those things. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And for the lower bound, we're controlling for these kind of three behaviors. Again, this just we additionally also control for other kind of individual level education, income, employment status, and so on. Okay. Right. So I'm going to skip the detailed results of survival analysis, but instead I'm going to present this end result about this age standardized mortality rate. Right. So there are two kinds of mortality rate. One is PD related mortality rate, right? The other one is DAS related mortality rate. And so PD related mortality rate is represented by this kind of wider band, and the DAS related mortality rate is represented by these narrow lines. And white is gray color, and black is red, Hispanic is blue color. Right. So first, let's focus on the PD related mortality rate. Okay. So in 1997, right, white has slightly lower PD related mortality rate, which is about 0.55 to 0.7 per 1,000, compared to black, which is about 0.67 to 0.73. Right? And this PD rated mortality rate is also higher than the PD rated mortality rate among Hispanics. But over time, the PD rated mortality rate among white experienced this kind of steep increase. But for black, the PD rated mortality rate decreased over time until around 2010. And after 2010, there's a substantial surge. That is mainly due to the substantial surge in the moderate distress related mortality hazard ratio. Right, so in other words, it's a moderate distress become more detrimental for black population after 2010. And for Hispanic, they experience this kind of continuous decline in the PD related mortality rate. Right, so basically, like white, black, Hispanic, they have very different PD related mortality rate trend over time since 1997.
So and these white lines represent kind of confidence interval.
It's not confidence interval. It's kind of lower bound and upper bound analysis. So lower bound is controlling for smoking, drinking, and obesity in the survival model, because these three behaviors potentially can be the mechanisms.
Okay, that's the lower bound, and the upper bound is what?
Upper bound is the one not controlling for these three health behaviors. Because if we
so in the case of white, controlling for this makes a big difference because the line is very wide. However, in the case of Hispanics, basically makes
it does not make much difference. Right? So in other words, it maybe means that the psychological distress effect on mortality for white population is especially mediated through these three health behaviors. But for Hispanic, the influence of despair mortality is less likely to be mediated through these three health behaviors. Right? So basically, if we do this upper bound, lower bound, we potentially can kind of underestimate the despair effect, right? Because this despair effect may go through these three health behaviors. If we control for these three health behaviors, then we can underestimate the mortality impact of despair. That's why we create this upper bound and lower bound.
Can you say a little bit more why for the psychological distress-related death rate? So the bounds are so wide, whereas for the DAS death rates, it's very thin.
Right. So for DAS, that's just one number, right? So it's not confidence interval here, right? So DAS related mortality rate is from the CDC data, right? It's from multiple cause of death data divided by this CDC population. So it only has one number. It's not confidence interval.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Right. So yeah. So for DAS, it's just one number for each time point for each race, and for the PD, we have this lower bound, upper bound to account for the possibility that the impact despair mortality is going through smoking, drinking, and obesity. Any question? Any more questions?
Are you going to say something about the fact that during the period of the Great Recession, the risk of mortality for blacks strongly goes down, when supposedly that's a period of much more importance of psychological distress because of unemployment?
Yeah, so I think it probably is not due to unemployment, because also like Hispanic, they also face unemployment after Great Recession, right? So I think, we haven't kind of really looked at why this moderate distress rate mortality hazard ratio surge among black population after 2010, but I think it's probably not related to this It's probably not related to the Great Recession, but probably due to other mechanisms. But we haven't really tested that yet. Okay, so right now we only do some kind of more kind of discrete analysis.
That big drop in mortality there is coinciding exactly with the Great Depression, the Great Recession, 2008 to 2010 or so. So that's the period in which unemployment rates in the U.S. strongly went up and then down. And many people argue that when there is high unemployment, those who are not unemployed are scared to get unemployed, and therefore that generalizes the level of distress in society. Indeed, in this period, usually suicide goes up. So it's interesting because
Right. So yeah. So for PD, we find this the reason why this decline is. So we actually in the next slide, I'm trying to kind of disentangle the confusion of the preference of PD and also the mortality hazard ratio of PD. Right? So this decline is not really due to the decreasing preference of PD, but it's due to the decreasing effect of PD on mortality over time. Right? So actually for Black population, the level of PD is more fluctuate over time, but in terms this decline in PD-related mortality rate is mainly due to that decreasing effect of mortality, decreasing effect of the PD on mortality. Okay, so but in terms of why this the effect of PD on mortality declines over time, we haven't done that yet. But it's kind of it's a full analysis to figure out what's kind of macro condition driving this decreasing mortality impact. Okay.
Can I ask one?
Yes.
Is there any panel dimension to this data, or is this all cross sections?
Yeah, it's all cross section, and so the analysis is based on survival analysis, right? So they have this. So even though data itself is cross sectional, but mortality is kind of linked mortality data. But
what I'm wondering is then the smoking, the drinking, that's also current.
Yeah, it's current. It's based on NHS data, so it's kind of it's current behavior. It's not kind of longevity.
So given that what you showed us before regarding the hazard rates, would it make sense perhaps to maybe one way to control for the stocks of smoking or the stocks of drinking is to create some synthetic cohorts, look at individuals that are 10 years younger. You see what I mean? So build a measure of the smoking and a measure of drinking that is a stock variable, not something as a flow.
Yeah. So that would be So if we have longitudinal information, then we kind of account for these kind of temporal changes in these health behaviors.
I think that would matter for the nodes.
Yeah, it may be. Yeah. Yes.
What does the general PD look like between certain times?
I'm sorry, can you speak?
What is the general psychological distress variation across the groups look like over time? Is it tracking on that? You're controlling for it. I'm just curious. Like, is the trend that white men are getting more depressed, and the other groups are either flat or going down? Or what's the trend? Is it track on this exactly, or you just
Yeah, very good. So actually, I'm going to answer this question in the next slide.
Okay.
Right. So next slide I'm going to kind of figure out where are these due to the changing preference of PD or due to changing the effect of PD. Right. So okay, let's go back to this because PD, white experience this kind of distinct increase, right? So in top 14, then white actually have a higher level of PD-related mortality rate compared to black and Hispanic. Right. So next we kind of want to focus on kind of compare PD-related mortality rate to the DS-related mortality rate within every racial group. Right? So for white, like PD-related mortality rate is about like twice, it's much higher, right, compared to the DS-related mortality rate. And for black, also the PD-related mortality rate is about like twice as high as this DS-related mortality rate. In other words, it means that if we only use DAS, we underestimate the mortality impact despair for black and white population. Right. And the story for Hispanics is slightly different. Actually, for Hispanics, the PD-related mortality rate is actually lower than the DAS-related mortality rate. Right. So using DAS-related mortality rate, we can actually overestimate the mortality impact of this mortality impact despair for Hispanics. And over time, for PD and DAS, they can observe similar pattern for white population, but then implies that DAS-related mortality pattern may be partially contributed by these disparities. But for Black and the Hispanic, PD relative mortality rate declines over time, but the DAS is relatively flat until more recent years. That may imply that the DAS, for Black Hispanic, the DAS relative mortality pattern may be less likely to be affected by despair. At least despair is not a main determinant of this DAS relative mortality pattern among Black and Hispanics. And we further can look at that number of deaths, and the overall pattern is similar to the age-dependent mortality rate. And one thing I want to emphasize again here is if we use DAS, we can substantially underestimate the mortality impact despair. Right? So in 2014, PD can account for like 100,000 to like 138,000 deaths, and the DAS only account for like 83,000. Right? For Black population in 2014, PD account for like 15,000 to like 18,000. DAS dropped out of suicide rate that's about like 8,500. Right? So using DAS related number that we can substantially underestimate the mortality impact of despair for white and Hispanic, white and Blacks. Yes.
Is it differentially underestimated between men and women?
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. Yeah, so we can kind of double check where it's kind of over underestimation may kind of differ by gender. Very good question. Yeah. So next step is trying to address the question this scholar have raised about that's why PD-related mortality rate shows such a different pattern by racial group. Right. So where this is due to the differential trend in the preference of PD, or it's because of the PD become more detrimental for white compared to Black Hispanic. Right. So we do some kind of contextual analysis, and the dotted line here is the observed PD-related mortality rate, and the dashed line here is a contextual if the mortality hazard ratio of PD is fixed in the 1997 to 2002 level. That's the first period. Right? And the dotted line here is a contextual if the preference of PD was fixed in the first period. Right? So for white population, if the mortality hazard ratio of PD was fixed in the first period, in other words, it means that if the vulnerability to PD was fixed in the first period, then PD-related mortality rate will become much flatter. It will increase only about like 6% over these 17 years instead of 34% over these 17 years. And if the preference of PD was fixed in the first period, the PD-related mortality rate still increased, but it increased about like 18% compared to 33%. So in other words, it means that among white, this rising PD rating that is primarily caused by this increasing vulnerability to PD. So even a rising preference PD also make a sizable contribution, but the main contribution here is the increasing vulnerability to PD among white. And for Black Hispanic, then we find that temporal trend is mainly contributed by the decreasing vulnerability to PD. Right? So again, the dashed line here is a counterfactual in this counterfactual PD-related mortality rate if the mortality hazard ratio of PD fixed in the first period. So once mortality hazard ratio PD fixed in the first period, then PD-related mortality rate only slightly decline among Black population and become flat among Hispanics. Right. So in other words, this declining the PD-related mortality rate for Black Hispanic, at least before 2010, was mainly contributed by the decreasing vulnerability to PD rather than due to the trend in the preference of PD. Anyone has a question on? All right, so basically we found this white kind of underwent this distinct increase PD-induced death rate, and have higher rate than Black Hispanics since the early 2000s, and which is kind of primarily because of the white increasing and higher vulnerability to PD, less preference to PD. And in fact, which I did not show here is if we look at the percentage of population with moderate or severe distress, white always have lower number. Right? So Black Hispanic actually report higher preference level of PD. The reason why PD-related mortality rate is higher and also increasing among white is mainly due to the mortality impact of PD. That's why white is more vulnerable to PD, and they also become more vulnerable to PD over time. even though their preference level PD is always lower than black Hispanics. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
No, I wanted to comment, your data in 2014, I've been seeing that it seems that now these racial disparities have narrowed. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I think, we actually work on one project with my student right now. It's look at racial trend. I think since 2015, the white-black kind of gap in mortality is kind of really narrow. Right? And again, we're trying to figure out what's the mechanism. We're trying to look at the cause of death, but the very preliminary results is this kind of narrowing racial gap in more recent period is mainly due to the increasing homicide and drug behavior and accident among black population. Right? So, where this reflects the increasing PD level, PD in impact, we don't know yet. But we only look at the cause of death is mainly due to this kind of behavior and accidental death. But where it's kind of new trend reflect PD or not, we don't have an answer here.
If I understand this correctly, you try to argue that Case and Deaton, their theory about death of despair is correct, but their measure is imperfect.
Yes. Yeah, we're trying to say that Case Deaton, their concept of death despair is correct for white population. But on the other hand, that narrative can be a bit misleading as well, because we will infer from that narrative that white men potentially have higher level of despair. But that is not true, because within every period, black Hispanic always have higher level of PD compared to white. Right? But again, the reason why experience this increasing despair-related death is mainly because of the vulnerability to PD. It's not because of PD level. That's why the Case Deaton is right about the concept, about despair increasing among white population, may become more detrimental among white population. But on the other hand, this is not a complete picture, because if we look at level of PD despair, black Hispanic is actually higher. So in ours we give this complete support for Case Deaton's narrative.
You have 10 minutes left.
Okay, right. So the third paper is about this cohort health trend. I'm going to go through this very quickly. So basically, we want to kind of look at the trend in multiple dimensions of health from baby boomers to millennials. And first, we look at cognitive functioning, right? And